Well, more than 90,000 people have signed a petition calling for a charity to take back an award which they gave to Tony Blair for his work to address poverty in Africa. The Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, was given the Global Legacy Award by Save the Children US at an event in New York. This petition says his legacy in Iraq overshadows any achievements in Africa. An article in The Guardian has been criticised in a post on the Office of Tony Blair website. The award's called the Global Legacy Award. Matthew Doyle is here to talk to us about it. He was a special advisor to Tony Blair, 2005, was it?
That's right, yep.
Okay, and Chris Nineham is from Stop the War Coalition.
Correct.
Very good morning to you both. I'm interested in this business of Tony Blair's reputation, Matthew, which has sort of taken the kicking as the years, really largely, partly because of his association with the Middle East and with various kind of big business people. Is that what's done it? What's the problem?
I think that for a number of people it's clear that the decisions around Iraq will mean that it's impossible to have any sort of rational debate about his time in office or out of office. But if you look at what this award was for, which was ultimately for his commitment to Africa, then I think on any rational analysis, on any objective basis, he was a transformative Prime Minister for the continent of Africa.
Was he?
Yeah, from setting up the first UK Department of International Development through to the Commission for Africa report that led to the G8 summit of Glen Eagles, which did far more on aid and debt that you'll remember from reporting at the time.
The present government has kept that kind of commitment to aid going.
Absolutely, and that's to be welcomed. I think what that showed was that we established a new consensus whilst we were in government. And if you look at what Tony Blair's doing now, one of the things he's done out of office is set up his Africa Governance Initiative that is working in 6 countries in Africa at the moment. And he's got teams on the ground in Sierra Leone, in Liberia and Guinea working as part of the Ebola crisis at the moment.
That's the case for Tony Blair, Chris Nineham, and yet you can't forgive him from Iraq. Is that what it's all about?
Well, where do you begin, really? I mean, I think most people feel quite rightly this is an absolute travesty. I mean, first of all, on Africa, as I was tangentially involved in the Make Poverty History campaign, and I think it was very much driven actually by the social movements, and it was given traction and potency by the fact that hundreds of thousands of people demonstrated and protested to put pressure on the G8.
Come on, let's be honest about that. You can get as many protests as you like. You need a Prime Minister to do something.
Well, but I mean, what I'm saying is it wasn't him that initiated it. He was responding from pressure. But also, let me say on the record, Make Poverty History, unfortunately, is clearly a campaign that has abjectly failed. Anyone who's seen the pictures on TV recently of the desperate misery caused by Ebola in the region will recognise massive levels of poverty right across the region, growing inequality.
Ebola isn't generated by poverty.
Can I speak? There has been some economic growth, but it's been combined with spiralling inequality and massive cuts to social services right across the
region. I really want to talk about Tony Blair,
Yeah, but I mean, that's why he's been given. He's been given this award for Make Poverty History, and poverty hasn't been made history. But poverty is very current. Well, okay, but I mean, good intentions, But the crucial question here is about Iraq, and how can we separate off?
The crucial question here isn't about Iraq. This is the problem, Chris. Your determination is to make this a debate about Iraq, when actually the award was for his work on Africa.
Yeah, but the question is, should Tony Blair, someone who has pursued a foreign policy initiative with great energy that caused utter devastation and misery to millions of children in the Middle East, 2 million children were displaced because of the war in Iraq. According to the UNHCR, 93,000 children were disappeared in Iraq.
That.
Fine, but you're making my point. But you're making my point for me is that your view on Iraq means that it's impossible to have any rational judgment on anything else.
No, but Tony Blair actually did these things.
Absolutely, there are perfectly legitimate.
So he's been given the award.
There are perfectly legitimate
criticisms.
The award is not for what he.
Correct.
There are perfectly legitimate criticisms that you can make about Iraq.
That's the point. You say you can't separate everything you now say about Tony Blair has to be covered by Iraq.
When someone gets an award, you have to look at their overall contribution to the well-being or otherwise of human beings. It's obvious, and it's quite clear that he's done more to make children suffer than any British Prime Minister.
That's the case again. So I want to then talk about
history. There's no question about that.
I want to, because something on which you might agree a bit more really is the way his legacy is now. By and large, it's when you say Tony Blair, you don't get cheers anymore. Like when you say Lady Thatcher, you used to get cheers. You certainly don't anymore. What happens, Matthew? What happens between power and afterwards that we in the end people become, I know you might say it's all about Iraq, I wonder whether it's a symptom of the years going by. We turn on those who are deemed to be responsible for the way the world is. What goes on?
I think the critics just always get more publicity than the supporters, and that's inevitable. Whether you're talking about
it's more than
Baroness,
that, Matthew,
no, I don't think
well,
it is.
It is. There is a real groundswell.
There are plenty of people that you could have in this room that would argue that, for example, Tony Blair's record on LGBT rights was transformative for this country. That his commitment to education was transformative to this country. There are plenty of people that you could get and argue on. Sorry.
You really think it's our fault if Tony Blair?
No,
or
I'm not saying it's your
Thatcher's
fault. I'm saying that. But the reality is, look, take the issue of Africa. Tony Blair was in Sierra Leone 2 weeks ago on the ground dealing with the Ebola crisis. To be fair, it wasn't a BBC interview, but what was the media interview wanting to talk about? The latest machinations of the Labour Party, not the work that he was doing in Sierra Leone tackling Ebola.
Yeah. What about this? What happens to people's reputations, Chris? I mean, I know you feel very strongly about Tony Blair. You probably feel equally strongly about the late Lady Thatcher, negatively as well, I guess. But do we have a tendency in this country to rubbish those who lead us?
I'm not so sure about this. I think it's just been that the quality of our leadership in recent decades has been abysmally low. I mean, think about, for example, the reputation of Attlee and the post-war government, the Labour government. I think most people think that was a fantastic government that instituted the NHS, that brought in all sorts of reforms that have benefited people. The problem has been, actually, since there was a turning point with Thatcher, that we've adopted these pro-market privatisation policies and got more and more into organising these foreign wars. And as Thatcher said, when asked what was her biggest legacy, she replied, Tony Blair. And that's unfortunately the case. Tony Blair has continued the Tory policies and got more aggressive with the foreign wars, and it's just very unpopular.
But you did a list of things that the Clement Attlee did. I could have done you a list, which I won't for time, of the things that Labour government did, from record investment in public services through to the national minimum wage, through to civil partnerships, through to a whole range of measures. If you want to put the positive side...
balance sheets.
No, it's not about the balance sheet for you, Chris. It's an obsession with one issue. Now,
no,
it's
I didn't talk about one issue. You talked about privatisation. No, I didn't.
You said it's all about foreign wars.
I specifically talked about privatisation and free market policies. Did you not listen to me?
You could talk about Northern Ireland, for instance. You might...
As I say, I mean, particularly the stuff around LGBT policies and so forth. There's all sorts of things that were good about that Blair did. I'm not denying that for a moment, but it's about the balance sheet, and it's about it's clearly in the popular view that most of what he did was detrimental and was disastrous.
Yeah, well, as I say, in the same
and especially to children, to be honest.